over here, I have the table from the ACS here. So we've done most of the heavy lifting for you here. So we actually give you, if you've been watching the program, you've been following from the previous chapters, we do the heavy lifting for you and give you just the direct sources of everything you need to study for the knowledge areas, for the risk management, and in some cases for the skills area. So just, on your free time, make sure you go ahead and review this thoroughly and have a good understanding of what they're trying to let you know. So we'll move into the main things for the session. We'll start with knowledge area 1 to knowledge area 3, which pretty much covers the airspace types, the requirements, the charting symbology, and the other airspace areas we need to know with regards to the national airspace system. So there's different airspace categories. So the FAA basically classifies the airspace into 3 major different categories. There's one more we'll talk about towards the end, but on the higher level, you typically want to think about airspace under like 3 major categories, where you have the uncontrolled airspace, we have the controlled airspace, and we have special use airspace. So the uncontrolled airspace there's only one, which is the class Gulf airspace, class G, and then you have under the controlled airspace, you have class Alpha, class Bravo, class Charlie airspace, class Delta, and class Echo airspace. So this typically, you just call it class A airspace. Nobody really says class Alpha airspace, but for the rest, you can say class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo airspace. You get the idea. And then you have a special use airspace. So a special use airspace, there's a acronym I use, which is WARM PC. I didn't make this up, it's just sort of a general acronym people use to remember the special use airspace. So the W is for your warning areas, the A is for your alert areas, R is for your restricted areas, the M is for your military operating areas, the P is for your prohibited areas, and the C is for your controlled firing areas. So I'll be going into more details, which is for each specific airspace in the slides to come. So in this image here, I have like a general picture of what the sectional chart looks like. So the sectional chart, which we talked about in the previous section on cross-country flight planning, is very important to your career as a pilot. You really need to familiarize yourself with the sectional chart, what it looks like. So here I basically just have a picture of the airspace around New York, the city of New York. As you can see, this everywhere that has yellow just pretty much just tells you about areas where it will be lit at night, where you have light. So there's more things which, after going through this session, you'll be able to actually pick out what they individually mean. And, through the course of your training, you'll get to learn more. So in the previous session on cross-country flight planning, I also gave tips and a few pointers on how to actually successfully know what everything on the chart means. You go into your check right knowing what everything on the chart means. This is really going to impress your examiner. So this is the key right here, is the legend. So here I just highlight what the legend tells us about the airspace, because today's topic is the national airspace system. So on the actual legend, it has a lot more information. So typically you see class Bravo airspace here with the solid lines, and the solid magenta lines is the class Charlie airspace. You have the class Delta airspace with the dashed blue lines, and this right here just shows you a number in sort of like a broken square. It tells you the ceiling of a class Delta airspace. Sometimes it comes with a minus, so that minus just tells you it's up to but not including whatever number you have here. So if you have like a -40 here, it's basically telling you the ceiling of the class Delta goes up to 3,999, not actually 4,000 feet. You also have like this broken magenta line here is class Echo airspace, and this is a class Gulf, class Echo transition. This is also Echo transition, and this here I typically call them the zipper lines, which will be, we'll be going into more details with all these things in our future slides. It basically just tells you the different floors of a class Echo airspace. So we'll go into more details here, starting with class A airspace. So if you need a better understanding of what the details of class A airspace are, you can go to the FAR's part 91.135, and you can go to AIM 2-2. That's AIM Chapter 3. Has a lot of information about the airspaces. So in future slides, as you'll see, we'll put the references in here for you as well, just to make sure you know where to look at, so you don't spend too much time, for where the actual information is. So all the airspaces from 18,000 feet MSL to flight level 600, which is 60,000 feet, is Class A airspace. So in order to enter Class A airspace, you must be equipped and rated for instrument flying. You must be on an instrument flight rules plan, that's an IFR flight plan, and you must also set your altimeter to 29.92 inches of mercury here in the US. And just remember, A is for altitude, so high altitude. So basically, that's Class A from 18,000 to flight level 600. The Pilot Ground Bridge program is, a program that's there to help aviation enthusiasts or student pilots, sharpen up their knowledge. So we're putting it for sale out there right now. And if you want to support us in this movement in making pilot training affordable, please consider purchasing the course. Here to this page on this link here, we currently have it on the Teachable platform. So you never know, if you're watching in the future, the link might change. So please make sure you check the link in the description below for the most up-to-date link to gain access to the course. But if you do come to the page here right now, you can scroll down to where it says to choose a pricing option. And we currently have the course going for $199. We just launched and we're doing a special early bird sale. So it might go up to the regular price of $279. So like I said before, if you do purchase, just know you're helping somebody else become a pilot, and you also be getting access to great content that's going to help you sharpen your aviation knowledge. So I look forward to seeing you in the course if you do purchase. And in the meantime, we'll go back and focus on the content for today. And thank you for listening. Then we'll move on. We'll talk about Class Bravo airspace. So Class Bravo airspace basically surrounds and protects our busiest airports. So in your city, think about like the biggest airport, or sometimes it might not necessarily be the biggest airport in your city, but for most major cities, the biggest airports are surrounded by a Class B airspace. So think about your JFK's MCO over here in Orlando, the Atlanta Airport, Dallas Fort Worth, Chicago ORD, San Francisco and LAX, and there's more airports like that. So the airspace around those airports is typically a Class Bravo airspace. So everyone in Class B must have a clearance, and you need to wait until you hear cleared into the Bravo airspace. So this is very important, because when you're flying, you need to pay attention and make sure you're not entering into a Class Bravo airspace. So before you actually fly into a Class Bravo airspace, you need to make sure you hear the air traffic controllers telling you you're cleared into the Bravo airspace. And pilots must have the private certificate or a student pilot certificate with a logbook endorsement. The aircraft needs a MOST-C transponder within 30 nautical miles of MOST-C veil, typically around the area they need you to have a MOST-C transponder. And then the shape typically is like an upside down wedding cake, and typically goes from the ground, which is the surface, up to 10,000 feet MSL, and the solid blue lines like we've seen in the previous the legend in the previous page, is solid blue lines on the chart. So the AIM actually prohibits landings by students at Boston, JFK, LAX, ORD, etc. Meanwhile, some Class B airports actually have flight schools. So that's sort of like to give you an idea of how revered Class Bravo airspaces are. So the general idea is to reduce the risk of having smaller aircrafts crashing into bigger aircrafts. And this right here is an image of what the Class Bravo airspace in Orlando looks like. So you typically have all these solid blue lines that demarcates different sections of the Class Bravo airspace. So usually the farther you go out from the airport location itself, the higher the floor of the Class Bravo airspace starts from. So typically, usually around the airport, it starts from the surface up onto 10,000 feet. And then you see some demarcations, and like numbers like this tells you in this area right here, you see it moves slightly further south of the airport. The floor now increases from 900 feet up to 10,000 feet. And then if you come out here, even further away from the airport. Now Class Bravo starts from 1,600 to 10,000 feet. Then if you come all the way out here, the even goes starts a little bit higher, which is from 3,000 to 10,000 feet. And then, you can apply the same thing all over wherever you see these blue numbers within the blue lines. So it basically just tells you where the floor of the Class Bravo starts, where it ends. And if you need to read more, just go to part 91.131 or in 3-2-3. And then you have Class Charlie airspace here. Basically, most of the details is in part 91.130. So Class Charlie airspace is basically around big airports that have some commercial service. So think of Orlando Sanford International Airport, Daytona Airport, San Antonio International Airport, and Tucson Airport. So it's a lot of other airports like that. As long as you look at your sectional chart and you know what the color of a Class Charlie airspace is. So if you look at the airport and you see those lines around that airport, basically lets you know, okay, this airport is Class Charlie airspace. And the requirements are basically you need to establish a two-way radio communication. So a two-way radio communication is basically whenever you call an air traffic, your ATC, the air traffic controllers, you typically give them your call sign. In this example, I'll be using 978 Alpha Tango. So let's, for example, if you call them, you say tower 978 Alpha Tango 10 miles west, requesting a full stop landing. If they call you back and say 978 Alpha Tango stand by, so you basically establish two-way radio communication. But if they say aircraft calling 15 miles or 10 miles south or west, stand by, at that point, because they did not say your call sign, you do not have two-way radio communication established. So that's the idea. Then another requirement is you need an operable Mode C transponder on your aircraft. And then the dimensions for the Class Charlie typically starts from the surface up to about 4,000 feet AGL. It's charted with thick magenta lines, like we've seen in the legend. And then the radius is usually about 10 nautical mile radius. So in some cases, the Class Charlie usually has two rings, as you'll be seeing shortly. The inner radius is typically about 10 miles, and then the outer area is about 20 miles wide. And then the memory aid you can use to remember Class Charlie is a congested airspace. And then on this slide here, you typically see what a Class Charlie airspace looks like. Like we have the legend here is a thick magenta line, and you can see this thick magenta lines surrounding this airport right here. So this airport right here is basically within the Class Charlie airspace, and this tells you where it starts from and where it ends. So in this case, it starts from the surface up to 4,100 feet, and then when you go slightly further out from the airport, it starts from about 17,000 feet, 41 to 4,000. Sorry, it's when you go further, it starts from 1,700 feet all the way to 4,100 feet. Sorry about that. So that's the general idea of how you want to understand what the airspace dimensions are. And then we'll move on and talk about Class Delta airspace. So Class Delta airspace is covered in part 91.129. It usually surrounds the airport's control towers. And just like Class C, you must establish two-way radio communications. So this is one of the requirements for entering a Class Delta airspace. So I already explained what establishing a two-way radio communication is. So it's typically represented by dashed blue lines, usually a circle, and it starts from the surface to 2,500 feet AGL, and it's typically 4 nautical miles in radius. So the dimensions, in some cases, it may be 5, it may be 6 nautical miles. It's usually just tailored depending on the surrounding area of the airport. A memory aid you can use to remember Class Delta is dialogue. So you need to talk to somebody before you actually proceed into the airspace, establishing two-way radio. So this slide right here shows us what Class Delta looks like. So this airport right here, Blue Airport, is within a Class Delta airspace. It starts from the surface to 3,500 feet. And then, to read more about the airspace, you can always go to chapter 3 the Aeronautical Information Manual to read more. And then Class E airspace. So Class E airspace is a little bit more, it's a controlled airspace, but it's a little bit more broad compared to the other airspaces. So I always like to think of Class E airspace as elsewhere or everywhere else. So E for elsewhere or everywhere else. typically Class E airspace. So there's different dimensions, and as you'll be seeing in more slides to come, there's different ways to actually know what Class E airspace you're in. So usually it starts from 14,000 feet MSL to 18,000 feet MSL, and sometimes it starts from 700 feet AGL to 1,200 AGL, as we'll be taking a look at shortly. And the VFR operations are not controlled in the same sense as in Class A to Class Delta airspace. So there's no need to communicate or obtain permission to fly in Class E. Rationale behind that is you have higher weather minimums so that the VFR aircraft don't hit IFR aircraft coming out of the clouds. Basically, this allows operation inside or near clouds without an IFR clearance. So that's the general idea with the Class E. So over here, we'll take a look at the different types of Class Echo airspace. So this is why I said it's a little bit more complicated. You need to know this acronym right here. Well, you don't need to know it, but if you have any other way of remembering all these things, come up with your own acronym or your own memory aid. But the idea is to know that all these airspaces fall under Class Echo airspace. So you have surface echo. So surface echo is usually when you look on the chart and you see a dashed circle with dashed lines. That's with a magenta color. So basically a dashed magenta circle, it's a surface echo. It's basically echo starting from the ground all the way up. And then the E is an echo extension. So the echo extension is usually attached to maybe like a Class Delta airspace. It also has like a dashed magenta line, usually in like a squarish shape. And then you have the echo transition areas. So the echo transition areas are like the shaded magenta areas. And then those are the ones that typically start from 700 feet. And below that is Class Gulf airspace. We'll be talking about Class Gulf shortly. And then you also have Victor Airways. So Victor Airways is also a type of Class Echo airspace we'll be taking a look at shortly. You have offshore echo. You have the domestic en route. Those are usually not chartered. Then you have above Class Alpha airspace. So we talked about how Class A airspace goes from 18,000 feet, flight level 600. So above flight level 600 is considered Class Echo. So that's above Class A airspace. So this is what the echo transition looks like. So we talked about the echo transition with the shaded magenta lines that starts from 700 feet. So whenever you see a shaded magenta that has like a blue shaded shape, that is Class Echo starting from 1,200 feet. So that's the general idea. So below that is usually Class Gulf to the surface. So in this case, for example, it will be from the ground. Within this area, from the ground to 1,200 feet will be Class Gulf, and then from 1,200 feet upwards will be Class Echo, unless otherwise depicted with another ship of another airspace. So that's the general idea. And then offshore echo is represented by these zipper lines right here. So the zipper lines basically tells you, as you can see, this is just off the coast here. It's offshore echo, and it tells you echo starts at 2,000 feet MSL here. So that's the general idea. As you can see with the legend here, it tells you it differentiates the floors of Class Echo airspace greater than 700 feet above the surface. That's the general idea. See, over here, wherever you have 2,400 feet on that side, echo starts at 2,400 feet, and on this side, echo starts at 4,500. And then the Victor Airways, which we talked about earlier, as a type of a Class Echo airspace. You really need to know about the Victor Airways. This is a common question on the Checkride as well, as with most of the things we already talked about. So it's usually 4 nautical miles on each side of the center line. So if you look at your chart, you'll see wherever you see a line that has a V and a number like this, that's basically a Victor Airway. Victor Airway looks like. So it's usually about 4 nautical miles wide in reality. And it starts from 1,200 feet AGL up to 18,000 feet AGL. And right here, we just have a picture of what it looks like on a typical chart. So you have this right here, Victor 93, so Victor Airways, and a Victor 490 right here. It's also a Victor Airways. So it's 8 nautical miles wide, 4 nautical miles on each side, and 1,200 feet to 18,000. So those are the dimensions you need to know. And I can just think about them as like highways in the sky. That's the general idea. And then we have Class Gulf here. So Class Gulf is a uncontrolled airspace. So it's different category by itself. So uncontrolled airspace basically means that ATC exercises no control in class golf. So you can pretty much just fly, do whatever you need to do. So the dimensions are usually below a class echo airspace. So for example, some cases echo starts from 14,500 feet MSL. So below that is class golf. In cases, echo starts from 700 feet AGL, so below that is class golf airspace. And then in some cases, it could be 1,200 feet AGL for class echo. Then below that is class golf. And then, sometimes it could start below like a different or non-standard altitude. So, typically denoted with the blue zipper lines we looked at earlier, where they give you the MSL altitudes. So usually below that is considered class golf, so you can just go for it. But the memory is just go for it. You can fly. You don't have to talk to ATC. You don't have to talk to anybody. If you need to study a little bit more, you can go to the AIM chapter 3-3-1.